It's difficult to grasp that Borders disappeared back in 2011. These stores were once ubiquitous, and then suddenly they vanished. I'm certain you remember seeing their signage frequently. There's still a location in my neighborhood where I think that was the former Borders every time I pass by. At their zenith in 2008, they operated more than 500 locations, generating nearly $3 billion in revenue. For years, they held the position as the nation's second-largest bookstore chain, trailing only Barnes & Noble. While other major players like Books A Million existed, these two truly dominated the market. However, Borders ultimately filed for bankruptcy and ceased operations entirely in 2011, while Barnes & Noble survived. Today, I want to explore what transpired, how Borders achieved such prominence, and where things ultimately unraveled. The beginning. The Borders name originates from its founders, Tom and Louis Borders. In 1971, these University of Michigan students in Ann Arbor recognized that a college town would be ideal for launching a bookstore. It bore no resemblance to the 30,000 square foot locations we later associated with the brand. This was a modest 800 square foot shop selling mainly secondhand books. As anticipated, it resonated strongly with the college population. The cozy, welcoming atmosphere proved popular, and within several years, the success of that initial location enabled them to launch additional stores in cities like Indianapolis and Atlanta across the United States. The superstore revolution. During the mid-1980s, retail was experiencing a transformation. Companies were abandoning smaller store formats in favor of massive superstores. Best Buy adopted this approach. Bed Bath & Beyond followed suit. Borders did too, and plenty of stores without B in their names joined the trend as well. Borders is actually considered a trailblazer in the industry, opening their first superstore ahead of any competitors in 1985. By 1992, they had expanded 21 superstores concentrated entirely in the Midwest and Northeast regions. The Kmart era. In October 1992, Tom and Louis Borders announced they would sell their entire operation to Kmart in exchange for an undisclosed quantity of Kmart shares. Kmart's motivation was clear. 8 years prior, they had acquired Walden Books, a very different bookstore chain. Walden Books featured smaller, traditional stores located almost exclusively in shopping malls. Kmart wanted to deepen their bookstore involvement, and this acquisition accomplished that. I believe they also viewed the large format stores as the future, making this their major step toward that transition. The partnership was short-lived. Shortly after the acquisition, Kmart merged both bookstore chains into a single division, which in 1995 was separated into its own publicly traded entity called Borders Group. This meant Borders Group had an initial stock market offering, with all proceeds going to Kmart. Technically, Kmart retained 13% ownership initially, but this proved insignificant as they sold at stake to Borders just months later, making them fully independent. Hey, quick favor before we dive deeper. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the company's documentary, smash that like button and subscribe. Explosive growth. Once independent, Borders expanded at an unprecedented pace. Revenue climbed from $400 million in 1995 to $2.8 billion by 2008, their peak year. Let me explain what distinguished Borders and drove their success during this period. Unmatched selection. The inventory was unparalleled. They were renowned for stocking that obscure title you couldn't locate elsewhere. If you needed something rare, Borders was your destination because they offered a broader variety than anyone else. Well over 100,000 distinct products per location. This was made possible through their remarkable inventory management system, which they claimed was the industry's most advanced. It actually employed artificial intelligence to project sales and recommend stock levels accordingly. This helped guarantee that merchandise would sell rather than collect dust on shelves. The same system applied to their music department. Exceptional customer service. Borders was famous for old-school quality service. Their staff members were predominantly full-time, largely college-educated, and considered passionate and knowledgeable about literature. They even had to pass examinations demonstrating this before being hired. Inviting environment. Borders pioneered the espresso bar concept among major bookstores, and by the mid-1990s, they were present in virtually all locations. Later, in 2004, they partnered with Starbucks through a licensing deal to feature Seattle's best cafes in most stores. Competitive pricing. Their prices were considered fair. Not much more to elaborate on there. The Walden Books asset. Remember, Kmart brought those two chains together, and they remained connected through the spin-off, and actually until closure in 2011. The prevailing belief was that the smaller Walden Books model was becoming obsolete, while the larger Borders format represented the future. Consequently, the company largely neglected Walden Books, channeling their resources and focus toward Borders instead. For an extended period, both chains generated profits, so they essentially redirected Walden Books' earnings to fuel Borders' expansion. This is evidenced by the fact that throughout their time as an independent company, Borders locations continually increased while Walden Books locations steadily decreased. The decline. That covers it. The entire sector was flourishing, and Borders discovered innovative ways to capitalize on it. But circumstances definitely shifted. The company's profits turned negative in 2007, and they never recovered. They lost nearly $1 billion over the following 5 years, including a $300 million loss in their final year. You simply cannot sustain that. You accumulate debt to offset those losses, hoping for a turnaround. But when losses persist, you cannot even service that debt. And when debt payments become impossible, bankruptcy follows, which is precisely what occurred. They owed over $1 billion when they filed for bankruptcy in 2011. The initial strategy was to recover, hopefully finding a buyer to assume control. At one point, Barnes & Noble appeared potentially interested, but nothing materialized. By September that year, all locations had closed. That was the end of Borders. What went wrong? It's a tragic conclusion, so let me attempt to explain what happened. I recognize the entire industry faced challenges, and the economic climate wasn't favorable, but Barnes & Noble weathered it all, as did numerous others. So I want to concentrate on factors unique to Borders, and I have several. Internet failure. Perhaps their most critical mistake was failing to leverage the internet. There are multiple aspects to this, but essentially, they first launched Borders.com as an online retailer in 1998, already somewhat delayed compared to competitors. It was genuinely disastrous. In that inaugural year, website sales represented less than 1% of store sales. It eventually grew to 3%, but remained relatively insignificant. Additionally, it operated at a loss. It never generated profit. I must assume they examined those figures and concluded it wasn't worthwhile. So after 3 years, in 2001, they essentially surrendered it to Amazon. Officially, it was a co-branding arrangement, but Amazon assumed control of the website, inventory, customer service, and virtually everything else. Consider this. Borders possessed an effective method for predicting customer behavior. Perhaps if they had approached this more seriously, they could have become what Amazon is today. Just food for thought. They finally relaunched it in 2008, but that was far too late. E-reader delay. Alongside this, e-readers emerged. Digital books, essentially. For a time, all bookstores developed their own versions. The Amazon Kindle launched in November 2007. Barnes & Noble introduced the Nook in November 2009. Borders technically released the Kobo in July 2010, the latest of the three. Unlike the others, they had an external party develop it. E-readers became enormously important in their industry. And once again, they provided too little too late because they simply underestimated their significance. CD and music overinvestment. My third reason follows similar lines. They became too invested in CDs and music. In 1991, they began selling music and movies in selected stores, and within several years it constituted a substantial portion of their business. They went so far as to purchase other CD retailers, and it was even displayed beneath their famous signage. I'll concede that's challenging, though, because by now CDs have obviously been almost entirely supplanted by digital music. But it was a gradual transition. There was no definitive moment to reference, making it a difficult decision regarding when to pivot away. They made the wrong call. Risky real estate decisions. Another reason for their downfall is they established many stores in questionable locations. They were taking chances, wagering that the large format stores would continue drawing increasing numbers of customers. For instance, when launching new locations, they felt compelled to maintain rapid expansion, so they would occasionally accept less than optimal areas, reasoning that they would eventually capture that community. These involved long-term leases as well, so there was no abandoning the strategy if circumstances deteriorated. When things did deteriorate, issues like this magnified the problem. Selection became less valuable. I have additional points. What about their celebrated extensive product selection? In the 1990s, carrying hard-to-find books genuinely attracted customers. But as the 2000s progressed and everything became accessible online, those offerings became less appealing. One of the store's primary selling points rapidly became irrelevant, yet they maintained it at considerable expense. Since costs remained constant but sales declined, this negatively impacted their profitability. Declining service quality. I have one final reason that's somewhat more speculative, but I thought I'd mention it. The customer service. That was a major feature during their successful period. Remember, predominantly full-time, college-educated staff, and all that. But by the end, I believe it had changed somewhat. It's not that I ever experienced poor service, but I suspect when they encountered financial difficulties, this was one area where they began reducing expenditures. Perhaps they could no longer afford to recruit or train people to the same standard. My evidence for this is that they definitely shifted toward a higher proportion of part-time employees. Perhaps some former employees or Borders customers can comment on this, but that's my theory. Conclusion. I think that clarifies it. Combine all these elements, and honestly, it's challenging to envision any alternative outcome. Let me know in the comments. Were you a Borders customer? Many statistics indicate that some of you stopped patronizing them before closure, possibly around 2009. If so, what initially attracted you and what caused you to leave? But realistically, even though sales were lower, they still had billions in revenue when they shut down. If you were a customer, were you surprised by the news? And how did you react? As I consistently mention, this hasn't been an exhaustive list of reasons for their failure, but rather a compilation of reasons I consider most significant. If you have additional insights, please share them, and any other thoughts about Borders, leave them in the comments. I'd appreciate hearing your perspective. Thank you for watching.